Swami Brahmavitananda is here from Mumbai. This is his second week from fear to fearlessness. Last week we got halfway. We got from fear to courage. This week I think we're going from courage to fearlessness or something like that. I'm sure Swamiji will tell us a great deal. Swami B, as we affectionately know him, has been an enormous supporter of the festival, and I'd like to thank him on every occasion. Whenever we've asked anything of him from a festival perspective, he's always turned around and supplied it. Always incredible energy, but that's the fighting spirit in him. He's actually a warrior at heart, and it's lovely to have him back to talk to us again this week. So welcome, Swamiji. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Oh, so just a quick sum up of what we did last time. We saw that fear is universal, born a human being, born as a living organism. Fear is natural. We also saw how fear can paralyze us because of the alarm reaction, etc. This is what we are conditioned during our evolutionary days. We also saw how fear helped the human race to survive, because recklessness will only kill. A cautious approach will help you survive. Then we did something about understanding fear, that all fear comes because I appreciate a sense of loss, that I can lose something which I don't want to lose. Not only that, if I lose it, I can't handle that loss. If you could handle that loss, that fear is manageable. If you think you cannot handle that loss, then there is a problem involved. Then fear becomes more. That this way we have a lot of fears. Some universal, some peculiar to each person. But in every case, one thing should be understood is that it's easier to push through that fear and do what it takes. The more you do that, the lesser the fear becomes. The more you do something that you're afraid of doing, the less the fear becomes. Therefore, overcoming fear is courage is necessary for that. I cannot handle that loss, has to be converted into I can handle that. I also told you the story of Major General Suri, how he stood in that minefield with exploding shells, dealing with the situation. He admitted to being scared, that his knees were knocking together, but he did what it takes. Okay? Therefore, living in courage involves that. Now, here comes certain questions over here. Before I go into the questions that came up, I want to handle that question that has come up will help me link to the future topic. So before that, I want to handle one or two small things here. Now, it's easy to say, respond in courage. But what do you do when I am having that reaction in me? I need a pause button in my mind. I need to create this pause button where I say, stop, stop, stop. Here is where some of the simple yogic practices can help. One day will say, in fact, all martial artist practices, focus on your breath. When you're getting that fear, etc., just pay attention to your breathing. You're not doing a pranayama, you're not doing a breathing exercise. It is more known as prana dharanam or prana ikshanam, to watch that breath. Just watch. Cool down. Now respond. Don't forget to breathe. They say that because in fear you're paralyzed, you're not breathing. You're feeling very insecure, your breathing isn't shallow. No. Take some long breaths. Watch it. Take a few deep breaths if necessary. Watch that breath. Calm down. Now respond. Simple technique. No big deal. No big deal. It's simple. Your breathing happens. You just have to watch it and quieten it down. If it is ragged, if it is haphazard, or you're not breathing enough, just have to regulate it a little bit to normal breathing. Not any great pranayama, not any great qigong work. Simple, normal breathing. But that paying attention creates a pause button in your mind so that now you can choose a different response than one of panic or fear. You can choose to be courageous. It's important to focus on this freedom of choice, because however hopeless a situation is, there is always a choice. You would normally say there is no choice because all other options are worse than what you are going to do. Therefore, they say there is no choice. There is always a choice. There is always a choice. The more you focus on that, the more you use your creativity to find options, the more encouraged you will be able to live. To tell yourself, this is important, to tell yourself, others have lived with that loss, so can I. Others have lived with it. If others can do it, so am I. They're all the same. We are all in the same boat as human beings. When I look from outside, looks like a very courageous person. Yeah, he is courageous, but he also has fear inside. That's why I gave you the example of Major General Suri. In an exploding minefield, guy is calmly directing operations. Shells exploding, mines exploding, calmly. Of course he is scared, but he had that courage. If he can do it, so can I. It's important to do that, because he was also born as a human being with all the vulnerabilities of a human being, as I was. It is good to look up to a hero. It's good to look up to a role model. It's not healthy to put the person on a pedestal and worship him and say he is great, I'm useless. That point is a problem. It's rather good to say, hey, he is good. He's a great hero. He has shown me the way. I can walk behind. I can follow that. In my own way, because we are maybe different people. That's okay. In my own way. Therefore, this is important. This type of recognition. Therefore, it's important to see, no, this is not done in the situation. This is done when things are okay. What? That I look at different scenarios in life. See what is it that I am afraid to lose, because I'm afraid I can't do without it. And see how I can manage that loss. Name, fame, money, loved ones. I'm not wishing any of this loss on you. I'll pray that you don't have this loss. But you have to look at yourself and see, if this loss happens, how will I manage that? How will I deal with that? Important. Important. And when you can see that you can manage it, that you can deal with that loss, then you will find yourself living in courage. And most likely, you're not negatively inviting that loss in. By your own negative thinking, you're not inviting that loss. Therefore, to look at different scenarios of your life, see what you're afraid of. Now, this only you can do, not me. You have to sit down and see what exactly are your fears. And what is it that you're afraid to lose? What is it that you think that I cannot handle if I lose that? I cannot handle it. And see how you're capable of managing that loss. If this was a live workshop, I would ask you to take a paper, some paper, pencil, and work it out. Work it out. How do you handle this loss? What do you need to do? What support you require to handle that? What is the support you require? Who are your support systems? Who are there as a support system? Who's your friend, philosopher, guide? Who's your buddy who can help you? Who's a mentor who can help you? And if you're blessed with a guru, great. Yeah. If you do that, then you're courageous. You're living in courage. Of course, there is fear. You're living in courage. If fear was not there, courage also is not necessary. Why? No fear. But courage becomes necessary because there is fear. Now, last time a question came up. What about the fear of the unknown, the fear of death? Yeah, important question. The fear of death is not really speaking the fear of the unknown. It is a fear of loss of all our loved ones because I'm going to walk away. They are not walking away, I am walking away. Therefore, I'm going to lose everything. And in childhood, we have been brought up with all these religious belief systems. You'll go to hell if you're doing something wrong. And we are human beings. All of us have done plenty of wrong things in our lives. Who has not done wrong? Oh my God. I have a great list of the good things I have done. Very impressive list of the good that I have done. And if you look at the wrong that I have done, it's even more impressive. Okay. So everyone has done something. And that subconscious fear which we picked up in childhood, I'm going to be roasted in hell. Now, religions try to control people and keep them on the straight and narrow track with all this. Okay. Okay, there will be some difficulties I have to undergo. Big deal. Big deal. I can undergo that. No big deal. Can you imagine what will be the other way around? If after death you go up there and they say, and the gatekeeper asks you, how was heaven? Because earth is heaven. So it is not the fear of the unknown. It is the fear of all that we imagine. Here is where we need to bring in our trust in Ishvara, in Bhagwan, in God. Not exactly happy with the word God in English, but for want of a better word, okay, God. Because yoga also accepts Ishvara in the picture. In the Yamani Yamas it comes. It's important for me to build up my trust in Ishvara. Yeah, you'll stop imagining this is the process I'm talking about. Your trust in Ishvara. What is that? Look at it. I came into this world as a helpless baby. I could not even turn on my side. I was helpless. To survive, to grow, whether I was born in a small middle class home, in a rich home, or on the streets, What I needed was given to me. The air I needed to breathe was available. The water I needed to drink was available. It's not that I came with birth carrying millions of liters of air. No, I just came with a pair of lungs. Air was there in Ishvara's order, in Bhagwan's order, in God's order of creation. Air was provided, water was provided, food was provided, caregivers were provided. In fact, I came with nothing to a 5-star setup. Sorry, not 5-star, all-star setup, because when I looked up at the sky, I only see the stars, especially now. So I came to this all-star guest house. You don't go to a 5-star hotel carrying your bed and bedding and things like that. You go to a 5-star setup with just a bag of personal effects. That's all. Here, you came with nothing, no clothes even. Just your body. Your little suitcase you came with, that suitcase was your body. Your little carry-on, your little backpack was this body of yours. You came here with nothing. And everything is taken care of. Caregivers were there, people who introduced you to this life and helped you grow. And you were given what was positively necessary for your growth, what was negatively necessary for your growth, the challenges that you faced. That's also positive, not really negative. The things that you're afraid of are there so that you can grow. It's a tough school. Earth is a tough school. Therefore, everything was provided. So why do you think, why do you imagine that when you leave this earth and goes wherever, whichever dimension you go, most religions talk about heaven and hell. The Vedic systems, the Hindus, Vedic system, talk about 14 dimensions, graded. So did the Buddhists. 14 dimensions, up and down. 7 up, 7 down. In terms of up and down, meaning in more pleasurable experiences, more problematic experiences. So what makes you think that you will not be provided for there? If you believe that this is only one life you have, according to your religious interpretation, then when you go, you're going to meet all your people before you, who went before you, who deserve to be with you. You'll meet all of them. And the people who are left behind will join you one day. So it's a temporary leave of absence. That's all. If you believe in karma and rebirth, hey, we have been meeting with people, intermingling with people, leaving them, meeting people again, leaving them. This has been happening. I've survived every one of those and done well, prospered, because I now come to yoga and Vedanta to know the truth about myself. Therefore, I have done well. I have grown enough to be able to understand this. This trust one needs to cultivate. When one cultivates this trust, one stops having these wild imaginations. Because remember, even though all religions talk about the other dimension, nobody can say with certainty. Believe me, when you go there, you'll find it different. Why? Because we are 3-dimensional creatures. And a 3-dimensional creature is trying to imagine the 4th dimension. Here is a book. A 2-dimensional creature has length and breadth, no depth, no height. So the 2-dimensional creature cannot really understand me, the 3-dimensional one. Why? I appear in his life as 4 fingertips, 4 circular discs. Appear, disappear. Appear, disappear. You can't recognize me. I appear like 4 flying saucers and disappear. Similarly, we are 3-dimensional creatures. Are we really going to understand the 4th dimension until we go there? So any religious description will be in keeping with the 3 dimensions that we are familiar with. But when you go there, it'll be different. That time, don't turn to the religious leader who may be with you and say, you described it like this, it was not like that. Okay, don't do that. He will say, even I didn't know it was like this. But at least your wild imaginations can stop, because everything was provided for you here. And you're leaving this dimension and going, why should things not be provided for you there as you are provided here? That trust in Ishvara, that trust in Bhagavan, that trust in God, the more you cultivate that, the more courageous you are. I mean, you should read some of these English poems. They're beautiful for developing courage. Yeah, very beautiful for developing courage. Old English poetry is very good. I don't know whether modern education, you have all that, but I had when I was a student in school in India. Okay, we had that. The Charge of the Light Brigade. Okay. Or other songs. Yeah, beautiful. Develop that courage in you. So, for that, you need to understand Ishvara better. In the Vedic way of looking at it, in the Vedantic way of looking, Ishvara is both the intelligence behind the creation and the material for the creation. Therefore, Ishvara becomes all-pervading. Why? Wherever the creation is there, the material is there. Wherever the kurta is there, the shirt is there, the cloth is there. And the intelligence of the person who made it, that is also present there. Therefore, Ishvara is both the material and the intelligence. If he is both the material and the intelligence, everything that happens, whichever dimension that is there, 3 or 14, it's all a manifestation of Ishvara. Therefore, I am literally in his lap. As a human being, I am in his lap. I will be taken care of. That type of trust. That type of trust gives you the courage. They say, what does not kill you will make you stronger. I will go one step forward and say, what kills you also will make you stronger for the next life or for the other dimension. Yeah, it's true. If you believe in the law of karma, birth and rebirth, how many times you have died? How many times you have lived and how many times you have died? Don't imagine. Develop that trust and say, it's a great adventure. I'm looking forward to seeing what is on the other side of midnight. I think there's a Sidney Sheldon book like that. There's the other side of midnight. So I'm waiting to look for what is there on the other side. It'll be very interesting to see. Isn't it not an adventure? I mean, how many places or adventures are left on earth anyway? So let me see what is there on the other side. Here on earth, I've been there, done that, done quite a lot of things. Yeah. Sailed the 7 seas, trekked in the Himalayas. Abhi kya hai? What else? Done a desert trek also. Now let me see what is on the other side. It's an adventure. You like to use that expression, na, been there, done that. Yeah. So then it's a great adventure. Look for it. Look at it like that. Rather than imagining all sorts of things that will happen to you after death. So this attitude of trust in Ishvara, that's called devotion, bhakti. And we call devotion like that. Devotion is not just saying, oh, yeah. No, devotion is developing this trust. Those acts of devotion, like singing a bhajan, saying a prayer, or any ritual, all that is meant to develop this trust in you, that I trust. Hey, look at from your own culture. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not fear. Though I walk in the valley of death, his rod and his staff comfort me. You remember that? It's part of your own culture, part of the Christian tradition. There. Yeah, but the more you understand Ishvara, Ishvara is not a matter for mere belief. Ishvara is a matter for understanding. So the more you understand Ishvara, the more trust develops. Why? Everything that happens here happens by the laws of Ishvara, by his principles of Ishvara. In fact, he himself is manifest. Ishvara himself, she herself is manifest as the principle. And everything that happens by that. They are not local laws that can change according to the whims and fancies of a person, of a prime minister or a president. No. These are universal. Across the board, they act fairly, unequivocally. Impartial. Therefore, what? I trust. Laws will never fail. Ishvara at work. Therefore, look at the courage that it gives you. Look at that courage. Phenomenal amount of courage. Yeah. That's why you develop the spiritual approach, the trust in Ishvara. Yeah. You develop that. The courage is phenomenal. Yeah. Birth, death, war. What is a virus? Nothing. Nothing will make you scared. You are living a phenomenally courageous life because you have that trust. Ishvara will take care of it. I do what has to be done. Victory or failure doesn't matter. I accept it as Ishvara's. Prasada from Ishvara. What is simply said as God's will. This prasada is a gift from the Lord. Because in India we have this tradition. Anything that comes from the Lord is taken as prasada. Graceful acceptance. When I do what I have to do, whatever happens is Ishvara. His grace coming to me. Success or failure, it is His grace. Life or death, it is His grace. What difference does it make? Good. Lord, it's time to come and meet you. Okay. Do not fear for those who are dead. Their fear should be for those who are living. Don't grieve for the dead. Grieve for those who are living. Other way of looking at it. Birth should not be the celebration. Death should be the celebration. So this is living in courage. The height of how courageous you can be. Then to go one step more to fearlessness. That is a small step. At the same time, it's a big step for mankind. Okay? It's a big step. Okay? Because there is no way you are going to be fearless unless you got rid of your sense of loss. And that can happen only. Your intellectual appreciation of a loss can happen only when you recognize that you are everything is in you, there is nothing to be lost. That you are in harmony with the whole universe. For that, you have to drop this notion of yourself as a finite being and recognize yourself as a limitless consciousness. It is only then you're truly fearless. Otherwise, you can be very courageous. But truly fearlessness is difficult. Let me tell you a small story. There was this Zen monk who was carrying a parcel for his teacher. So on the way, he had to cross a small bridge. As he had to cross the bridge, he found a samurai standing there. And the samurai says, anyone who tries to cross this bridge has to fight me. If you live, you cross. Otherwise, you die right here. So the monk said, I don't know how to wield a sword. I have not come to that. I am not a sword wielding monk. I'm a simple monk. I'm not a warrior monk. Samurai says, doesn't matter. If you don't have a sword, I'll give you one. But you have to fight me. So the monk says, I'll give you my word as a monk. I am carrying this parcel for my teacher. I will give it to him, come back and fight you. Then living or dying doesn't mean anything to me. Because I have served my teacher and now I'm going. Monk looks at him, okay, you look like a monk who will keep his word. Therefore, go and come back. So he goes to a teacher and says, sir, this is what has happened to me. I have to take your leave now. I gave him my word. So the teacher hands him a sword. He says, go, meet your death like a monk. He says, I have not taught you how to fight with sword. Therefore, meet your death as a monk. Here is your sword. So he comes back. He comes back to the samurai. Samurai is waiting for him. It's good you came. Now we are ready for battle. The samurai draws his sword and takes a stance. The monk looks at him. He also draws his sword, takes the same stance. Now, the samurai is thinking, let his concentration flicker for one split second. I will get him. And the monk holding the sword is saying, my teacher said, meet my death like a monk. Let him come and kill me. I am waiting for him. Both stand in stillness. Both stand in total stillness for a couple of hours. Nothing moves. The samurai lowers his sword and says, I didn't know I was fighting a master. And the monk says, what master? I was waiting for my death. Can you see that impeccable courage of trust in his teacher, in the Lord, that life and death is acceptable? Phenomenal courage. Nothing disturbs. This is the maximum you can be in courage. Therefore, somebody asked a question, integrity, all that. Yes, all the principles of dharma come into the picture of developing courage. Because remember, trust in Ishvara means trust in the universal. Universal dharma, universal principle. Therefore, integrity, etc. is part of the picture. Can't be avoided. Yeah. Your value structure cannot be avoided. Yes. And to cultivate the habit of letting go. Not being a control freak. We are all control freak. We want to control everything to what we want. To recognize that all control is an illusion. Really speaking, how much can you control? Can you really control your 2-year-old kid? You can't. You can't control the situation all the time. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. You can only handle your response to the situation. And fear is in the response, not in the situation. Situation, there is some gain or loss, that's all. Now, if I learn to let go, that's what it takes to be a monk. Learn to let go of things, not a control freak. I'm okay with things. I don't have to be in charge all the time. I'm okay letting go. If you do that, it's easier to live in courage. All these are various dimensions, facets of living in courage. And only when we do all this can we move on to be fearless. Therefore, living in courage itself is a big preparation. It's a preparation for fearlessness. Yeah, it's a preparation for fearlessness. This is what gets you there. This is what gets you. The whole ability of you to be able to live courageous. A courageous person can discover fearlessness. If you're living in fear, fearlessness is not for you. Not yet. You can get there, but you have to learn to live in courage first. So to live in fearlessness, from courage to fearlessness, it involves knowing the truth about yourself. It involves the message of the Upanishads and the Gita. The traditional teaching of the Upanishads and the Gita is involved to discover that I am that pure consciousness. In a quick, some of you have heard this from me at the World Yoga Festival. As a quick recap, in a short way, just to give you an idea. Because I'm sure all of you are living in courage or at least trying to do that. Therefore, it's good to have this insight. It helps the process faster. Okay. The simple inquiry in Vedanta that you may have heard about, who are you? Because it all starts with my self-judgment. The problem is my self-judgment. I judge myself to be a finite human being, and therefore I know I can lose things, and therefore in some cases the response is out of fear. If not in all, in some cases at least, the response is out of fear because I don't want to lose and I don't know how to manage it when I lose. That means if I don't want that fear, I should really look into my self-judgment of who am I? Am I really this finite being? Of course, I'm jammed. I know I'm doing yoga. I can do a lot of things with my body. I can bend it. I can do that. I can do this. That's all good. But are you really speaking the body? The body is an object of your awareness. Sometimes you will say, my body. Oh, what a session I had. I did Ashtanga yoga yesterday for 2 hours. Oh my God. My body is all aches and pains today. My body. Sometimes you say, I body. I put on some weight. That means I and body is same. I lost some weight. I equals body. So sometimes you'll say I body, sometimes you'll say my body. I and mine cannot be the same. My pen, not I pen. Okay. Even if Apple brings out a pen calling it I pen. Okay. Mine, not I. Therefore, mine and I cannot be the same. Therefore, who am I? The body is an object of my awareness. I am independent of the body. I function through the body. In fact, I can make the body do what I want. That means body is dependent on me. We are all yoga teachers. We are all yogis here, right? Therefore, I can twist and turn and do what I want with my body. I am independent of the body. My prana, I control it. Normally, it works on its own, but I can take charge and control it whenever I want. Pranayamas. My prana, not I prana. I am independent of my prana. My mind. Yeah, I purified it of all the kleshas, this, that, etc. Hey, you've done a lot with your mind. Yes. That means you are not the mind. You are the one who's working with the mind. You are independent of the mind. You are independent of your knowledge. You are independent of your ignorance. And my dear sir, what are you? I'm the one who's aware of all this, who's conscious of all this, conscious of my knowledge, conscious of my ignorance, conscious of my mind, conscious of my emotions, conscious of my prana, conscious of my body, conscious of the world. I'm the awarer, the one who's conscious of. We have a term for this in Sanskrit. We call it the Sakshi, The awarer, the one who's aware of everything. But an awarer you are with respect to an object of awareness. What are you without that? Without that, in the vision of the Upanishad, you are nothing but objectless awareness. You are that consciousness which is independent of the body, mind, and next. Now look at it. I started as a finite being. Why? Because I took the body, mind, etc. as me. And on inquiry, I'm coming to the fact I'm this awareness, this consciousness, which is aware of everything, independent of everything. Therefore, I am that consciousness. Not enough. Not enough. Because I can say you are a pocket of consciousness there, I am a pocket of consciousness here. That means we are still finite. That means there are things can be added to me, I can lose things. In the vision of the Upanishad, the consciousness is limitless. And limitless means unconditioned by time and space. Let's quickly see that here. Okay? This is a matter for study. In fact, there are people in the audience today who have been teaching, who have been learning this from me for years, because it takes some time, different nuances, etc. Okay, so when you look at that, let us handle the question of time. Time conditions my body. I age. All my hair was very black once upon a time, long ago. Now it's almost all white, except for a little bit here black. Everything is white. Age, time affects. Okay, so let us see what is this time that conditions everything. Even if you go by science, time is a gap between two events. In olden days, when we are an agrarian society, the two events were sunrise and sunset. It was enough for us. Sunrise and sunset. In between, we made it afternoon, mid-morning, evening, night. Enough. As this life became more industrialized, more sophisticated, we needed finer measurements. Therefore, this gap between two events, we started dividing up to hours, minutes, nanoseconds. But remember, it's all gap between two events. Now, the definition of a unit of time is the gap between two pulses of a quartz. We all wear quartz watches, isn't it? Most of us. Some of us wear automatic. But if you are wearing a quartz watch, it's the most accurate watches are simple watches, low-cost watches, $50, 50 pounds, low cost comparatively. These watches are all quartz watches, but they're very accurate. Why? Two pulses of a quartz is a unit of time. Therefore, in 1 second, there are 20,000 pulses. Wow, what degree of accuracy! But remember, it's always a gap between two events. Gap between two events is what you call time. The two events can be two pulses or sunrise and sunset, or birth and death, two events. Even according to science, there is no event without an observer. This is one of the fundamental principles of science. No observer, no event. Now look at it. The observer, me, with or without aids, okay? Sometimes for the pulses of a quartz, etc., we require an aid to see it, to observe it. With or without aids, the two events become, the gap between two events is time. The gap between two events is now narrowed down to or reduced to gap between two observations. One event, one observation, another event, another observation. The gap between two observations. And the observations are in an observer, in the observer's mind. Therefore, it becomes a gap between two observations, two thoughts. Therefore, what we call time is a gap between two thoughts. And what is there between two thoughts? Me, the conscious being. When the mind is there, I am there as consciousness. When the mind is not there, I am the consciousness that is objectifying the absence of the mind, whether it is sleep or samadhi. I am the one who's observing, objectifying the absence of that mind or the sleeping mind. Therefore, all that we call as time is really speaking a subjective phenomenon. Looks objective. The gap between two thinking. When I am looking at myself, from this flow of thoughts, we get this great thing, the great phenomena called time. Really speaking, I am looking at myself, the pure consciousness, with this thought after thought after thought, and calling it time. That's why when the thoughts are few and far in between, lot of time. Thoughts are moving fast. Oh my God, I'm stressed out for time. So slowing down is not in the outside world. Slowing down is here. Once you learn to slow down this, you have all the time in the world. Why? Because your time is moving slowly. Outside world may be moving fast, but you can see the gap there. There is so much of time. Therefore, time affects the body, all right. Does not affect your mind. There is nothing like old mind. There can be a mature mind. Yes. There can be an immature mind. There can be a tired, unenthusiastic mind, weighed down by all the experiences of life, tired and unenthusiastic. Or, in spite of age, you can be enthusiastic and not tired as far as your mind is concerned. There's no old mind. There's only a tired mind. Your mind is not affected by time. That's why we can be childlike in certain situations. What happens to you when you fall in love? You're childlike, isn't it? Kichikuing with each other, feeding each other, all childlike behavior. Yeah, what happens? We can be childlike, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Because the mind doesn't have age. Therefore, the time that is limiting everything does not limit me, the consciousness. If I'm unlimited by time, I'm unlimited by space as well. There is nothing that limits me. I am that consciousness that makes up the whole. But Swamiji, what about the world? Does not the world limit me? World also does not limit me. Why? Look at any object in the world. Let us examine, like how we examine time, let us examine an object. What is this book? Book? I don't see a book. I only see paper. There is no book, there is only paper. That is true, Swamiji. Our book is made up of paper. In fact, if I had filed it instead of binding it, if I had filed it, it will be called a paper only. Therefore, what you call book object, what you call book object is nothing but paper, content. Therefore, the object book becomes a form of paper for which you give a name. All right. But are you sure this is paper? This is nothing but wood pulp. Wood pulp can be in any form. In this form, it is called paper. That is true, Swamiji. So what you called as paper became a form of wood pulp. So wood pulp is the content. Are you sure? Wood pulp is nothing but hydrocarbons. In that form, it is called wood. In this form of hydrocarbon, it is called body. Both are hydrocarbons. Therefore, what you call as wood, what you call as a body, has become a form for the content hydrocarbons. But hydrocarbons is made up of molecules, atoms. A molecule is made up of atoms. Therefore, what you call as a hydrocarbon has become a form. What is there is only atoms. But an atom is made of 132 particles at the last count. Therefore, what you call atom The object has disappeared into a form, and what is there is 132 particles. You take any particle, if it has a dimension, I can reduce it to its content. Like how I reduced the book to its content. Similarly, remember we started with this book. The particle will be reduced to its content. What is the final content? Nothing. Nothing. We are talking about this book. This book is something. Don't tell me it is nothing. If I whack you with this, you'll know what it is. Really, I'm not joking. Yeah. This small little book is enough to knock somebody unconscious. So there is something. Therefore, it is something that is existing, but without a dimension. Dimensionless existence. Wow. That means what? Limitless existence is the truth of the world. Limitless consciousness is the truth of myself. How many limitless can be there? Can there be two limitless? Then limit each other. Therefore, what you call limitless consciousness is nothing but limitless existence. They are both one and the same. What exists is consciousness. Sometimes it's manifest as matter, sometimes it's manifest as something sentient, but they are both manifestation. They're both manifestation. So all that is there is one consciousness alone. You. There is nothing other than you. There is nothing to be gained. There is nothing to be lost. There is nothing to be gained. There is nothing to be lost. All that is there is you, consciousness alone. You're the only reality. Everything else is manifestation of names and forms. Then what is there to lose? What do you have to lose? Is there anything to lose? Can there be a sense of loss? All gain and loss are apparent, not real. You don't really gain anything, you don't really lose anything. If you recognize this and make it a fact of your life, you're truly fearless. This is the ultimate fearlessness. Ultimate fearlessness. Goes beyond being a warrior to a master. To be a, what is taught in Sanskrit as a jnani, a wise person. In the Gita as sthita prajnaha, or a yogi. This is what really makes a yogi a yogi. Not just standing on your head. That's important, of course. Tying yourself up in knots is important. To recognize you are not the body. Through your sweat and blood and tears, you understand you are not the body. Important. Through your sweat and blood and tears, you master your mind. Important. Through your sweat and blood and tears, you learn to let go. Important. All that makes you a courageous person. Then this courageous person comes and studies Vedanta, discovers fearlessness. That existence consciousness, limitless existence consciousness is myself. Otherwise known in Sanskrit as Satyam Jnanam Anantam or Sachidananda. These are terms you may have heard about. Satyam Jnanam Anantam or Sachidananda. This is me. Where is fear? I don't know. Where is courage? I don't need it. Only if you're feared, you need courage. Okay, in functioning, it looked like courage. The fearlessness will look like courage in functioning. So this is a journey. This is the journey. From fear to courage, the individual has to do a lot of work. From courage to fearlessness, you have to listen to the truth. Therefore, there is a lot of doing. I also said in one of the topics I will handle is the value of doing and not doing. So the doing is in all this. From fear to courage involves a lot of doing on the student's part. From courage to fearlessness It's not a question of doing. It's a question of not doing. It's a question of recognize. It's purely cognitive, the whole process. You have to understand. Let the teacher do the doing. Let the teacher do his teaching. You just imbibe, you just absorb the teaching. That's all. You sit and absorb. Therefore, where you have to be courageous, you have to do. That time, don't say, I will sit down quietly. Get up, do something. And where you have to know, from courage to fearlessness, that time, don't start doing. Listen. Okay. Listen. When you do that, you're fearless. What more do you want? There's nothing that life throws at you that you're afraid of. Any questions? I've spoken a lot today. Any questions?
Hello, Nikki. Yeah, I can see that you've raised your hand. So let's try and get you unmuted. Okay, you're unmuted, Nikki.
Great, thank you. I have two questions. Hello, thank you. The first one was going back to the beginning.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you very clearly. Can you just type it as a message? Is that possible?
Yes, okay. Do I do it on the chat?
Yeah.
You can speak as you type, and I'll perhaps shout it out a little bit more, Nikki.
Okay, it was he said that Ishvara was the intelligence behind creation and the intelligence and the material behind creation. Is he referring to Purusha and Prakriti here?
So the question, Swamiji, was that when you talk about Ishvara being both the intelligence cause and the material cause, are you talking about Purusha and Prakriti?
You could look at it as you can use that word Purusha and Prakriti in a non-technical manner. Because if you're looking at it technically from the standpoint of Sankhya, they're not identical. But when you're looking at it from the standpoint of Vedanta, yes, you could call it Purusha and Prakriti. Okay. And somebody typed a message saying it is not easy. Well, correct. It's not.
So did you
develop courage is not easy? Yeah, I accept.
Swamiji, can you just say a little bit about the slight difference between the Sankhya philosophy, which is followed by a lot of yogis through the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and then the Advaita Vedanta?
Yeah, sure. In Sankhya, actually the Sankhya Sutras and the commentary Karikas were written by someone called Ishvara Krishna. Okay. And when the Yoga Sutras were written, many of them started applying the Yoga Sutra, started applying Sankhya to the Yoga Sutra, which is in a way good for preparation, because in Sankhya, Purusha and Prakriti are two distinct realities. Both are real. Both are real. In the Sankhya, the spelling Sankhya, unless you are using dialectical marks, okay? Then it's different. Sankhya. Therefore, in Sankhya, Purusha and Prakriti are two distinct individuals. Prakriti is one, Purushas are many. That means each Purusha is many. The Purusha does not do anything. The Purusha only has bhoga, receiving whatever the Prakriti does. In a nutshell, this is the philosophy. In a nutshell. Therefore, the Purusha does nothing. Prakriti does everything. In Vedanta, it is slightly different. Purusha and Prakriti does not have the same degree of reality. Purusha is one consciousness, one existing consciousness. It appears as the many because of Prakriti, Maya. Maya is also one, But Maya is divided up as avidya, ignorance, in different minds. Whereas consciousness is not divided. It looks divided. Consciousness is one. Wherever there is a mind, consciousness is manifest. Therefore, the manifestations are many, but consciousness is one. And it is Maya or Prakriti that helps the consciousness manifest. So this is a basic fundamental difference between Sankhya and Vedanta. Now, Sankhya was applied to Yoga Sutras so that if you take the world as real, Prakriti is real, the world is real. Whereas in Vedanta, Maya is apparent, not real. The world is not also real, it's apparent, it's a manifestation. But if you take the world as real, you will be more committed to your sadhana, to your practices, and prepare the courage, etc., that is necessary. Prepare your mind. Remember, yoga is defined as, in Patanjali, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, mastery of the mind is yoga. You will take it seriously and you will do it. But really speaking, I would now like to use Vedanta as a backup for yoga. Why? What is my logic for it? Because there are about 30 Yoga Upanishads. Upanishads deal with the reality. Vedanta is about Upanishads. And about 112 published Upanishads are available. 20-30 of them are Yoga Upanishads. 20-30 of them are Yoga Upanishads. Upanishads dealing with yoga. Therefore, in the initial plan of things, Vedanta was meant to be the philosophy behind the yoga. Yoga was a practice to master your mind, and Vedanta to help you free yourself from the world. That was the initial plan. So I think later on they made it like this so that people will take their practices seriously. You take something as real, you will take the practice seriously, and the individual has to take the practice seriously to develop courage. Otherwise, courage is not developed. It is not real, etc., etc. You become vague about it. Therefore, probably the masters felt it's better to apply the Sankhya philosophy where you will take it real. But original thing was Vedanta. That's my view of it. And many Vedantic masters agree with me on this. So do the yogis who have studied Vedanta as well.
Thank you, Shamanji. That was good. Any other questions? You can just put on the chat line that you want to ask it, and we'll unmute you and you can ask the questions directly. Or you can technically raise a hand in Zoom. They're all stunned, Shamanji.
Okay, that's good. It's good to be here with all of you. I enjoyed being here. Thank you.
It is fabulous to have had you here. Thank you so much for all the time that you have spent with us and for your continued support. We wish you well, every good health, and until we meet again at the next Yoga Festival in 2021.
Definitely, and all the best to everyone.
Yes, absolutely.
Somebody has asked you, is there any recommended reading? Well, you can listen to my videos on the Gita that I put up on my YouTube, Arsha Vidya channel. You'll find a lot of Vedanta coming there. Yoga, of course, your Yoga festival, there are so many videos available.
We publish your video, we publish your website under the YouTube so that people can link to that and go to that. And indeed, there's a huge amount of material there for study. So thank you very much for that. I know that you put a lot of that material out. Thank you, everyone, for your time on a Sunday. It was lovely to share it with people around the world. And thank you once again, Shamanji. Pranam to you this Sunday.
Thank you, everyone.
Pranam to you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.